I believe we got the documentation in. I have a on-site inspection scheduled for Wednesday.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'd like to call this meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission to order. Ask the secretary to call the roll, please.
Commissioner Davis?
Here.
Commissioner Ellison? Here. Commissioner Gay?
Here.
Commissioner Hunter is out. She's not attending?
Correct.
Commissioner Stewart is not attending. Commissioner Stockdale?
Here.
Commissioner Strange is not here yet. He's not attending. And Commissioner Dewey, myself, and Commissioner Bryan.
Here. Ms. Womack, would you please advise us of the publication of notices of this meeting?
The agenda for the planning commission special meeting was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on May 1st and was sent out the same day. The agenda was amended and reposted in City Hall and on the city portal on May 7th and was sent out on May 7th. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any additional correspondence other than what was posted yesterday evening? Okay. All right, this is a preliminary review of the Belhaven site plan. It's a preliminary review of site plan review application number 1221-05, Belhaven Hotel. This is not a public hearing. This is a site plan, preliminary site plan review continuation. Mr. Forston, are you prepared to move forward at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Richard Forston, on behalf of the Papa John family and the project. We were here a month ago. I thought it was a good meeting. I think we addressed a lot of the questions that you raised, but you also asked us to come back. And in speaking with Mr. Mehta after that meeting, we developed a list of topics to address. So I'm going to march through those topics as best I can. Obviously, you're all free to ask questions anytime you want. But I'll go through the order that Mr. Mehta and I just went through them with when he and I spoke. With me today, I have Hal Dukes, whom you all know and needs no introduction. We have our architect, Peter Falat. We have our structural engineer, Sanjay Khanna, who spoke to you. We have Jeff Zell, who can speak about construction coordination and those sorts of things. We also have Jim Keeley from the Real Hospitality Group, which is the group that's going to be managing this hotel. They already manage, I think, 11 other hotels up and down the coast here in Sussex County. So he can speak to any operational issues or questions you might have. At the end of this session, assuming that all goes well, or I'll say relatively well, we would like to get this scheduled for the public hearing in June if we can. So and we talked about that last month as well. So that's our goal, is to get to the promised land of a public hearing on the site plan approval. So I'm just going to start. There were some, with floor area ratio, there were some questions about floor area ratio. And I want to apologize because I may have been a little thick last month when I was being asked about the floor area ratio. There was a question about the ballroom and the pre-function area outside the ballroom, and gee, were those properly deducted from the floor area calculations? Because the code says that the meeting rooms as permitted in this section, that is the 5,000 square foot deduction, shall contain no food preparation areas or areas devoted to the dispensing of alcoholic beverages. And, you know, I went back and looked at that a little bit more after our meeting, and I think two things struck me about that language. First, it says the meeting rooms as permitted in this section shall contain no food preparation areas. There's a separate kitchen that's included on that floor in the FAR. So there's no food preparation areas that is part of this space. mean, you might have a spread of food where, people go down the line and get their hors d'oeuvres or whatever, but that's not a food preparation area as I read this. It doesn't prohibit food in the rooms, certainly. And then the other part of that sentence says, or areas devoted to the dispensing of alcoholic beverages. I mean, this is going to be a generic ballroom and a, outside kind of, pre-ballroom outside area. There's not going to be any permanent bar, not going to be any permanent structures or anything devoted to the dispensing of alcoholic beverages. Doesn't mean there's not going to be alcohol served. It doesn't prohibit the service of alcohol. It just says there can't be areas devoted to the dispensing of alcoholic beverages. So I think that the ballroom and the pre-function, what's labeled pre-function area outside the ballroom where people will mill about, are both properly deducted from the floor area ratio for the second floor. And if you just deduct those two areas, it's about 4,400 square feet. There's some other meeting rooms and all that you could also deduct, but just deducting those two areas from the floor area calculations brings the second floor from about 83% floor area ratio down to 72.3%. So it's less than the 75% max that the code would otherwise allow. And as I say, I'm sorry if I was a little thick last month. I really hadn't had a chance to focus on that language. But I think once you do, it is proper to remove those from the calculation. Yes?
The section that you have are referring to, 270.21B5B, also says that the meeting rooms, the areas, it must be exclusively devoted to meeting rooms and no other purpose. Now, I'm assuming that your client or the property, the hotel management, are you saying it would only be for conference rooms and meetings as opposed to wedding venues, retirement parties, private parties?
Julie, can you move your microphone down?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. So I said that section also says that in order to be eligible for the deduction, the meeting room has to be a meeting room and used for no other purpose. And I'm questioning with food preparation in the vicinity, pre-function areas and so forth, whether this would be devoted, you'd be willing to stipulate or have a condition that area could only be used for meeting rooms, conference rooms, as opposed to wedding receptions, whatever other private parties. And I have one more question because it's the same principle, same paragraph. That section also says that the floor area for the meeting room, assuming it's eligible because it's only going to be used for a meeting room, and I think that would exclude the pre-function rooms, but in any event, shall not be counted in calculating the 50% maximum lot coverage. As I understand it, your client wants to deduct whatever the square footage is from the 75% limit for any one residential floor.
So,
And just to be clear, I raised both these points at the last meeting, so I assumed that you would come prepared to address them.
well, correct, but I mean, and I started, and you asked me questions before I finished. On the issue of meeting rooms, I would submit, which is, by the way, not defined in the code anywhere, that a ballroom, a wedding reception or other sort of event like that qualifies under the meeting room language. But, and the other point I'll make too is, and we made this point last summer and with the building inspector and all, the 75% maximum and the 50% average are not strict limits that apply anymore because we got the variance. And you can't meet those requirements and have a 3.0 floor area ratio. And so I think that all of those, the 75, 50, 50 are proportionally increased as a result of getting the variance. And it's interesting, you all had raised this issue last spring with us, and then as you'll recall, the hotel on the other side of Rehoboth, or the proposed hotel, also got a variance. They got a variance for 2.76 FAR. We got a variance for 3.0. But in that Board of Adjustment decision, the Board of Adjustment said, having found that an increase in permitted FAR from 200% to 276% is appropriate, it follows that an increase in the maximum FAR for floors 2 through 4 is presumed appropriate. Otherwise, the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable. Accordingly, the 76% FAR increase may be apportioned among floors 2 to 4. So the fact that even if you didn't subtract anything, and there are other meeting rooms, but if you didn't subtract anything from the floor area ratio for the second floor, you'd only be at approximately 83%. And on the other two floors, you're at 53%, 53.7, and 58%. So if we got to apportion this extra 100% among floors 2 through 4, the way that the board said with respect to the other variance it granted, to make it clear, right? Because as the board said, it follows that an increase in the maximum FAR for floors 2 through 4 is presumed appropriate. Otherwise, the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable, and that would be the case here also. So I think we're fine with the floor area ratio as it is, and I'm going to say this a lot. I mean, we talked about this with the building inspector, and he agreed. And so as far as we're concerned, in light of the variance we received, we are code compliant.
Well, Mr. Forston, I'm not surprised to hear you say that because you've said exactly that on prior occasions.
I like to be
But I
consistent.
would remind you that your notice of decision, which I have here, makes no mention of the language that was in the 1 Rehoboth Avenue decision. And so the words on your page show a variance for a 1.0 increase in FAR, but mentions nothing about apportionment. And back for just a minute to the meeting room. Section 270-21B5B starts out, quote, any one residential floor in a building in a commercial district used in whole or in part as a hotel, motel, or inn may include meeting rooms for use as convention facilities.
I'm sorry, I missed the section reference.
It's 270-21B5B. It's the
Yep.
same section we've been
Yep, got
talking
it
about.
right here. Yep.
Meeting rooms for use as convention facilities. That is not wedding receptions. That's not private parties. That's not a lot of things that a, quote, ballroom could be used for, but under the statute, you only get to deduct that square footage for meeting rooms used for no other purpose than in conjunction with convention facilities and reducing FAR only for purposes of the 50% limit.
Well, as I say, and you are correct that the variance we got at the time didn't include that language that's in the Grotto variance decision, but it doesn't have to be, because Grotto simply said what I think we should all agree upon, unless we're trying to be difficult. The Grotto decision said, let me flip back to that page so I get the language in front of me. Having found that an increase in permitted FAR from 200% to 276% is appropriate, it follows that an increase in the maximum FAR for floors 2 through 4 is presumed appropriate. Otherwise, the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable. The Board of Adjustment, in issuing that decision back a long time ago, didn't engage in a meaningless and unachievable exercise. It knew what it was doing, and in fact, the plans that were in front of it at the time that were shown to the Board of Adjustment, what did they show? They showed a second floor with a floor area ratio of 94.7%. As a result of different changes that have been made during the construction, design, and review process, that floor area ratio is now 83.8%. But the board knew, everybody knew who was at that public hearing, that the floor area ratio was going to be well above 75%. And the same with the third and fourth floors. The floor area ratio for those floors under the original plan, the third floor, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Go ahead, we're having a technical issue.
oh, okay.
Our microphone here is not going to work, so everyone will have to come to the podium.
Okay,
And
Sorry.
I'm trying to find out why.
right. So what I was saying was, you know, the language that the board put in its, Board of Adjustment now, put in its Grotto decision saying it's approved, otherwise it would have been meaningless and inappropriate, applies with equal force and logic here. And what I was just starting then, I'm sorry, Luke.
Please finish.
And then what I was just starting to say was that the plans, the conceptual plans that were presented to the Board of Adjustment, you know, our current second floor FAR, if you don't subtract anything, is 83.8%. The second floor FAR that was presented in the plans that were shown to the Board of Adjustment was 94.7%. And on the third floor, our FAR today is 53.7%. On the plans that were submitted to the Board of Adjustment, 57.1%. And the design has been tweaked and changed as a result of conversations and further analysis and stuff like that. But my point simply is the board knew not only that we were going for 300% FAR, but they knew because the plans that we were showing them as the basis for that request had higher FAR than the code otherwise permitted. So I think it's very fair to say, and the only logical conclusion that one can draw is that when they gave us an increase in overall FAR, they also had to give us, or implied in that, presumed in that, was an increase to the other FAR levels, because otherwise, as they said in the Grotto decision, otherwise the increase in total FAR would be meaningless and unachievable, and they're not going to do something that's meaningless.
Do you know whether the applicant in that Board of Adjustment variance proceeding that you're referring to asked the Board of Adjustment to make that subsequent finding? In other words, was that part of the variance request? Do you know?
I did
Or
not,
was that a sua sponte statement by the Board of Adjustment?
I believe it was a sua sponte statement. I mean, I don't have the transcript in front of me, and I wasn't at the hearing, but I have talked to the parties. And my understanding is that it came about because of the questions that you all were asking of us. And so the board wanted to make clear, when we give this variance, it includes anything else you need to implement it. Because otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And we're not in the business of doing things that don't make sense. So I really think that answers the floor area ratio question. I think the building inspector agrees with us, or he wouldn't have forwarded the plan to you.
I have one sort of clarification or question about, on the meeting room. You had mentioned that there was no, definition for meeting room, so you assumed it would be broad enough to cover, weddings and other events. However, the definition under hotel, motel, or inn does specifically list things that a hotel, motel, and inn can include. And it says restaurants, club rooms, public banquet halls, ballrooms, or meeting rooms. And yet, it does not include the ballroom in the discussion of meeting room space. So in other words, the definition does make a distinction between a ballroom and a meeting room, it appears.
Good point. Don't know if I agree with it, but I had not noticed that, so I get your point. But getting back to my larger point, it doesn't matter. We're splitting hairs here because we're allowed to go above 75, we're allowed to go above 50, because otherwise the variance would be meaningless and unachievable. I mean, my point is, if you did subtract them, then you're even under the 75. But even if we're only at 83, and we're still going to be at 53 and 58 for the other two floors, I mean, we're going above those numbers, but we can't help but go above those numbers if we're going to have a 3.0 FAR. And that's what the Board of Adjustment said in the other decision. They just said that those increases are presumed, otherwise it would be meaningless. So I mean, I probably beat that horse to death, And unless folks have further questions, I'll move on to the next issue that we talked about. Some of the questions, and Commissioner Strange isn't here, but I'm always impressed by his approach and his questions. I mean, there's no doubt that he is very, very thorough and comprehensive, and he asks good questions. I wish he was here today. He did ask a question about ceiling heights and FAR, and I mean, the answer we gave, but I wanted to reemphasize it, was that we did include in the FAR calculations those areas where there was extra ceiling height. So, and that's actually on the plans, and if it's not, we can make it clearer. But that was there. He asked us about the antenna again, and you know, as I said last month, I mean, no good deed goes unpunished. We're trying to add a nice architectural detail to this that will make it look richer, make it look nicer. We will do whatever needs to be done in order to comply with the code. I know there was mention about antenna being stealthy. I think that actually is in the context of cell towers. You know, they want people to disguise cell towers. No one likes to look at cell towers. We all want cell phone service. We just don't want cell towers. So we'll work that out with the building inspector. And, you know, look, at the end of the day, if we can't find a way to comply, we'll either go to the Board of Adjustment and get relief, or we just won't build it. But all we're trying to do is something that looks nice. That's all it is. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
You're not going to, it seems like it ought to be, the intent ought to be resolved during site plan review, because it said on here, we might just drop it, but you don't know that you're going to drop it. You might get a variance for it instead. Is that what you're saying?
I don't want to, I mean, the answer is, yeah, I don't know. I mean, because, you know, if it turns out we might not get a variance if we ask for a variance, or we might find a way to build it that is considered stealthy. You know, we'd like to have something. If you look at the old photos of the Belmore, there was a nice kind of feature. I wasn't, you know, when I hear the word antenna, I think almost of just a metal rod, or, you know, we used to have the antennas for your TVs, which means I'm old because I still remember those. But one way or another, we'll resolve that, but it shouldn't hold up, I would submit, the site plan itself.
Mr. Forston, you are aware that we need, in order to schedule a public hearing, we need the actual site plan that we are going to review and conduct a public hearing on. So you need to button up these loose ends now, please.
Well, if it makes a difference between getting to a public hearing and not, then we'll just drop it. And, you know, we'll come back maybe at a future day and just get a building permit for it, because that's all we'd otherwise need to do. And so, you know, we can do that. I mean, I think it's a shame because I think it's a nice feature, but obviously I appreciate the position you all are in. Don't get me
Yeah, I
wrong.
mean, how do we review something that's not in front of
Right.
us?
No, how do you review it? And it's not you don't have the authority to waive like the Board of Adjustment does.
No.
So, no, I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. So what we intend to do after this meeting today is, to the extent we have to make any minor adjustments to the current plan, we will do that and turn it around to you quite promptly so that you can have it in plenty of time before the meeting in June. So I've made a note, and we will just, the antenna will be missing. There'll be something where an antenna could go, but, and we'll have to go to the Board of Adjustment and get that resolved. Or unless we can find another way to do it that's code compliant, and again, we'll worry about that at another time.
Thank you.
There were questions about solar panels, and I think we answered them, but it was on the list that Luke and I had put together. I mean, they're shown. It's still our intent to put solar panels on the roof. We think that's important in this day and age, but we continue to view that as a building code issue, not a site plan issue. And I don't think the site plan, I mean, site plan is just the site plan. I mean, we still have to obviously come back once we get site plan approval with all the construction drawings and all the detail, you know, electric systems, HVAC, plumbing, to get approved by the town. And those codes make the zoning and subdivision code look like a pamphlet. You know, if you've ever looked at the International Building Code, it's more than a phone book. But we don't think there's anything more we need to do with respect to solar panels and the site plan at this time. I mean, it's our intent to do it. All the precise construction details, how are we going to do it, we just really haven't worked all of that. Can accommodate a truck of 45 feet in length. That's what's called a straight truck. And I have Jim Keeley here, and he can confirm this if need be. But, his group manages the hotels, 11 other hotels up, from Fenwick up to Lewis. And they get major deliveries, linens and stuff like that once a week. It's in a straight truck. They get food deliveries twice a week in straight trucks. Their suppliers do not use 18-wheelers. They're really big. So all their trucks should be able to use the loading dock, and obviously that would be preferable. Now, I can't promise you that there will never be an 18-wheeler that comes. If they have to order, say, a new washer or a new dryer, and that's being delivered by, Home Depot or somebody like that. I mean, it may show up in an 18-wheeler and have to be wheeled off, but for everyday well, they don't even get deliveries every day, but for their normal deliveries, there are no 18-wheelers, and all the trucks that come are straight trucks that'll be able to use that loading dock. So,
Would you define a straight truck for me, please?
It's, when you have an 18-wheeler, you've got a front and then a thing that hangs off the back, and this turns and then this swings. A straight truck is just one continuous.
Okay. So it doesn't have the maneuverability that an 18-wheeler might have?
I think it has better maneuverability because it's easier to back up, and it's, what happens. I mean, if you've ever had to pull a trailer on, your own car, the headaches of trying to back up one of those things. And so an 18-wheeler, I think, is more difficult to maneuver than a straight truck. A straight truck, you turn the wheel, you know exactly where you're going to go.
And is a straight truck of the same length?
Well, they don't exceed 45 feet is the point. That's the reason why that loading dock is the length it is. So it's big enough to accommodate them. Did you want to say anything more? What did I say wrong?
So I'm Jim Keeley with Real Hospitality Group. Just to tell you a little bit about us, we are the 12th largest third-party management company in the U.S. So we operate hotels all over the U.S. in urban, suburban, and resort areas. So here we have 12 hotels from Ocean City, Fenwick, Rehoboth, Lewis, and Frederica. And our hotels use 4 to 5 major suppliers, and we only order once a month because what we do as far as being fiscally responsible to the owners, we try to make sure that we make our orders in accordance to how much money we have or what we have as far what we call as revenue on the books. And as far as major suppliers, we would not have one in there once a week. It would only be once or twice a month. Now, food would be twice a week. But to clarify, a straight truck, that is a box truck. So that is a truck with a cab and a chassis with a box on the back. So that's typically what we have that in our hotels that makes deliveries. Now, Cisco, which is a provider, they do have trailered trucks, but they're single axle so that they're able to maneuver them quite easily. So I just wanted to give you a little clarification on that, if that helped.
Excuse me. How many of the hotels in this coastal area, I think you said there were 12?
Yes, ma'am.
That you all,
Yes, ma'am.
how many rooms do those hotels have on average? And do they have restaurants? And do they have 26,000 square feet of retail space?
Some of them do. As far as retail space, some do. We have a few on the boardwalk in Ocean City. We have some on the bay side in Ocean City. We do have some hotels that have restaurants, some do not. I mean, it just all depends on, the brand and the specific type of hotel. We have a variety of properties.
But do any of them have over 25,000 square feet of retail space?
Retail space, no.
I guess
I'm
along with
not
that.
really sure why that question is
don't-
relevant.
Well, I was going to ask a question. Is the loading berth going to be available to the retail stores or specifically unavailable to them?
We've designed it, and we've said before, and if you look at the floor plan, you'll see there's corridors
Yes.
that run from the loading dock to the rear of all the retail
Right.
spaces.
So it will be available to each and
Yes.
every store there?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And it will be available, it's designed to be available too. I mean, it's not like, oh, you can use it, but then you're on your own. No, we put in the corridor so you can actually get to the back of the retail spaces. Okay, thank you. I was close on my answers, I guess, right? Jimmy may just want to come back up here because the next question was about trash room capacity.
I'm sorry, before you leave the loading dock issue, as you know, the issue isn't whether, to me, whether the loading dock that has been designed, regardless of how the trucks are designed, for the hotel use is adequate. The issue is whether there should be a second loading dock for use by the 26,000 square feet of retail space, and keeping in mind that this facility, in addition to a full restaurant with bar area, meeting rooms, has a lot of activities. It's a very large complex, and it's a complicated complex. And your next door neighbor, Allison Blythe, who is not here today, wrote a letter that is embedded in the agenda, but I'd like to read the last paragraph of it. Lastly, I cannot impress on you enough the chaos that will ensue on Wilmington Avenue with one loading dock. Currently, the deliveries for the existing businesses on Wilmington Avenue create havoc and result in traffic being blocked in. Last summer, an ambulance that was attending a call was stuck on the ocean block of Wilmington Avenue with a patient on board and unable to get out for several minutes. I'm sure we will quickly see a line of tractor trailers on Wilmington Avenue with nowhere to turn around, trying to deliver with only one ramp available, since deliveries such as food and supplies for the hotel and other businesses take time. For instance, a delivery to Go Fish, that's her restaurant, can take up to 30 minutes to complete. And that, I think, is a concern that the Planning Commission needs to pay attention to. Because as you know, we are charged with considering not just provisions of the zoning code, which I think is fairly read to require a second loading dock, but we're also charged with considering 21 additional factors that are in Chapter 236-30E, which include motorized and non-motorized vehicular traffic flow on both on-site and off-site, access to structures, access to public and private streets, easements, or other rights-of-way, pedestrian movements, fire equipment and other safety and emergency access, streetscape, and impact on nearby properties in the neighborhood. Those are all factors that, as I say, the 236-30E says the Planning Commission shall consider these factors. This isn't discretionary. It's not we may take them into account or not, but we shall consider them. And I think they are all additional factors that warrant the argument that a second loading dock for the 26,000 square feet of retail space, regardless of how you've divided it up for illustration purposes on your proposed site plan, is not only warranted but required.
Well, so you and I have disagreed about this before, last summer. Obviously, we talked with the building inspector. I think the only fair reading of the code is only one loading dock is required, that no loading dock is required for the commercial space because none of the individual spaces will exceed 15,000 square feet. And under your code as currently written, you're not required to have a loading dock for any retail space, and it's singular, unless it exceeds 15,000 square feet in space. So we're in compliance with the code itself. I get that our neighbor doesn't like this project and will say anything, I think, quite frankly, to persuade you not to approve it. She engages in a lot of speculation in that letter. Remember, right now, there are no loading docks at all for any of the existing retail space. Candy Kitchen doesn't have it, Grotto's doesn't have it. None of the retail space that's currently there on ground level has any loading dock at all. And yet somehow things seem, I think, to be going okay. But now there's going to be a loading dock, and you just heard from the company that manages hotels up and down this section of the Mid-Atlantic, or our little section of the Mid-Atlantic, I should say. Talk about how infrequently there are going to be deliveries. I mean, food gets delivered twice a week. Not every morning, not every day, which may be the case with her restaurant. It's smaller, I don't know. But there's only 2 food deliveries, and otherwise, the other vendors are only coming like once every 2 weeks. So it's not as though there's constant truck traffic coming in every day, every morning, getting in each other's way. And by the way, that won't work for us anyway. I mean, there's going to have to be a schedule, and that'll be up to the restaurant, to the management company, to make sure that, you know, if Candy Kitchen wants to bring in another load of candy, and I don't know how often they bring it in, but if they need to bring in another load of candy, they're going to need to coordinate that so their truck arrives at a time when there's no other trucks there, and the same with Grotto and the same with the other retail uses. So she can say the sky is falling and there's going to be big issues. The fact is there's no loading dock right now, so things are going to get dramatically better in my view. And 1 loading dock is enough. That's all your code requires. That's all your code requires for this retail space. In fact, your code doesn't require any loading dock for the retail space the way it's written right now. So we're making this loading dock. It'll be shared by the hotel, which doesn't use it all that much, but it's there. And it'll also be available for the retail spaces, which don't have a loading dock right now. We're trying to preserve the retail on the boardwalk and on these streets. Because remember, you know, we could always put a hotel up on stilts, right, and just have surface level parking. Don't want to do that. Never wanted to do that. Mr. Papajohn is trying to build, I think, a legacy building here that'll be good for Rehoboth long-term, and it'll be here for, you know, 50, 60, 70 years. And it harkens back to his days growing up in Rehoboth. That's what we're trying to do. But if you're going to start piling on requirements that are, in my view, and the view of our management company, because they would take a different view if they thought differently, that aren't necessary and are just costly, then, you know, we're just not going to be able to do that. But as I say, getting back to where I started, the code only requires 1 loading dock. I understand you may read it differently, but you know, the building inspector is the guy who we talked to about it. He's issued a letter to that effect. It only requires 1 loading dock. Nobody has shown that, you know, despite the conjecture in the letter from our neighbor who doesn't want this project to move forward, nobody has shown that there's going to be a problem with too many deliveries or anything like that. The deliveries to this hotel are few and far between in the grand scheme of things. And so there just won't be a problem.
Mr. Ford, you just mentioned that the management company would coordinate this. So is the management company for the hotel then also going to be the management company for retail?
I'm going to say, like all good answers, it depends. I mean, they're going to be
Okay,
separate
you just
entities.
mentioned management company, so I wondered who they were, that's all.
Oh, I mean, Jim Keeley is here from the hospitality group.
Yeah.
They're going to be managing the hotel. I mean,
Right,
we'll
but you
tell
said it
our,
was all going to be coordinated, the
well,
deliveries.
we'll tell our tenants, right, because the Papajohn family will have the leases with the tenants in the retail space. It'll probably be an LLC that actually has it, but you know what I mean.
Just curious.
Yeah.
They were going to
I'm
also
sorry,
be
Jim, you wanna-
managing the retail, if you're going to be managing the retail space as well?
We would coordinate the dock through the hotel.
Right, okay,
That's how we would,
okay. So it would be essentially managed by the hotel?
yes.
The dock would be managed. They're not going to have responsibility for anything else related to the retail space.
Okay.
Mr. Forrest, in stating that the code does not require a second loading dock for the retail, you didn't quote the section of the code that is relevant, which is Section 270-36, which states retail or service establishment or other commercial use, not uses, use, with over 15,000 square feet or gross floor area in commercial districts. There is going to be over 26,000 square feet of retail space, any or all of which could be used as a single retail establishment. It could be divided up, those lines, those spaces on your plans, they're not binding, are they? Would you be bound by them? Would your client be bound by them?
We cannot have a space, a single retail space that exceeds 15,000 square feet, the way your code is written. And we know that, And you know that, and the building inspector knows that. And so if we went in the day after we built this whole structure and said, you know something, we want to combine all these retail spaces that are connected into one large space, and it's going to be 18,000 square feet. The building inspector would say, no. And he would say no because the code says a retail or service establishment or other commercial use, which is singular, over 15,000 square feet. Now, so long as Candy Kitchen is under 15,000 square feet, so long as Grotto's is under 15,000 square feet, so long as all the individual retail establishments, plural, so long as none of them exceeds 15,000 square feet, there's no requirement for a loading dock, period. So we cannot, the way the code is written right now, we cannot have a single retail establishment in excess of 15,000 square feet. And that was the basis for the building inspector's opinion.
I assume you're familiar with the First Street Station complex at the corner of Rehoboth Avenue and First Street.
I am. I've been there. I haven't been there in a
Has an
while.
aggregate square footage made up of a lot of smaller retail spaces and at least one restaurant. That establishment, that building, that development has a loading dock, even though there is not one use, whether it's restaurant or retail, within that complex that exceeds 15,000 square feet. I'm suggesting that the code requires you to aggregate the use into retail use, 26,000 square feet, and that is what controls. And when the code wants to be more specific, it is more specific, because if you look at parking requirements, those requirements are specified for each dwelling unit, each hotel rental unit, each office with 400 square feet or more, each retail store or service establishment, each with more than 15,000 square feet. We don't have the word each in 270-36.
You don't need, look,
It is the
you and I are just going to
aggregate of
argue.
the total square footage.
The fact that there's there's a shopping center of smaller shops elsewhere that has its own loading dock, for all I know, they did that because they thought it was a good idea. There's lots of stores in that space, and they might have decided, let's have a loading dock. They could have made that decision. It's not required by the code. Doesn't mean that you can't do it if you're the property owner, right? There's a lot of things I can do. I can go above and beyond if I want. But what I'm suggesting to you is the code doesn't require it, and I think that's the only fair reason. Otherwise, it would be written differently, and it would talk about aggregate, not using the singular, retail or service establishment or other commercial use with over 15,000 square feet. It doesn't say in total over 15,000 square feet, or retail or service establishments or other commercial uses totaling over 15,000 square feet. It says, it refers to the singular. That's what we designed. That's what we're providing. We're making the situation better simply because there's going to be a loading dock. And it doesn't make sense to me to have two loading docks where we know the one loading dock, if it's used more than twice a week for the hotel, that's probably a lot. And otherwise, we're going to have a loading dock sitting there not being used 90% of the time. So it doesn't surprise me the code is written that way. It doesn't surprise me that the code requires a loading dock for a hotel, because you just want that anyway. But it makes no sense to me to suggest that there should be two loading docks here, where the loading dock can be shared easily and efficiently. The existing retail establishments don't have a loading dock now, and now they will. And it should be very easy to coordinate its use, because as you already heard, the deliveries that the hotel receives aren't that great in number. So I don't know what more I can say about this. I'm obviously not going to persuade you personally, but I'm going to just say the code is written the way it is, and we have the building inspector's opinion on this, which I would submit as controlling. And I'm happy to move on, or I'm happy to continue the debate. Your call.
Yeah. Just by way of a cautionary reminder, we're not going to engage in a debate of the building inspector's authority at this juncture, perhaps ever here. But I know I put that in the category of wishing won't make it so. So let's just move on from that, please, sir.
That's fine. I was trying to make that same point, but not nearly as eloquently.
Mr. Forge, I actually have a question about the drop-off zone. It sounded like you had sort of combined in your response to the drop-off zone and the loading dock, and it sounded like you were going to move on to the trash, but I have a question about the drop-off zone that I really didn't think of until after the last meeting. But you had said that the drop-off zone approval is granted directly by the city commissioners and obviously comes after site plan, which I totally get. But it occurs to me now, was that mentioned as a license, that you all were going to get a license from the city when you say it has to be approved by the commissioners? Because what I'm thinking is that since it's a public way, it's probably going to need their vote as an abandonment, the way they did with the Beach Patrol building when they abandoned a part of the public street. So, and that's fine. I realize that comes after site plan, but I think we need to account for that.
So
in our
let
plan.
me answer that question two ways, or maybe even three. The license we were talking about, as I recall, was for the overhangs. If you're going to have an
Yes.
overhang
Yes.
above, you need a license for that.
Okay.
The drop-off zone essentially is the city agreeing to remove the parking spaces that are there so that a drop-off zone can be created. So that's all it is. It's not a license. There's not not anything in terms of a property interest granted to the property owner the way there would be with a license, for example, or what may have been done with the life-saving
But if
station.
those spaces, if it's blocked off, then it would be for your exclusive use, correct?
Well, we'd be the use right in front of it. It would be yellow, just like any other no parking
Yeah, but it would be
zone.
for your exclusive use. So nobody else could use that as a drop-off zone.
Other people might drop people off there, right? I mean, if you're going up to the beach and you're going to park, further down, you might drive up Wilmington Avenue, pull into the drop-off zone, drop off your family, and then go back to wherever you're parking. But it's not exclusive. We don't have the right to exclude people from it. You
Okay,
just
it's
can't
not
park in it.
exclusive. It's not exclusive. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Correct. But as you say, I mean, we got to work that out with the commissioners, and that comes in the process, that comes out. And actually, drop-off zone was next on my list, so I may have gone a little out of order here.
Before we move
Excuse me
on-
for
oh,
one
I'm sorry.
second. I'm not sure I followed that. I was interested in that issue, too. We move quickly from it is exclusive to it's not exclusive. Could you just clarify for me again why you say it's not exclusive if the city has to remove the spaces and give them up? I'm not arguing with you. I just want to understand your logic.
So, the city owns the public rights of way, subject to the public right of use, but the city controls public rights of way. The city can do a lot of things in a public right of way, right? It can create parking spaces, it can create handicap parking spaces, it can just XXX and have no spaces, right? So, but the city ultimately controls it, and the public has then the right to use the public streets, subject to whatever controls the city has put in place. So in creating the drop-off zone, my point simply was it would not be exclusively for patrons of the hotel, that, if you were a family and, you wanted to drop off the kids, you might come down Wilmington Avenue and then pull into the drop-off zone. Kids get out, they go to the beach, and, dad or mom, who's ever driving, goes back and finds a parking spot somewhere further down the road. Anybody would be able to use it, but, it's fair to say who would use it other than hotel patrons? Well, there might be some, was simply my point. It would not be an exclusive use. We couldn't say, oh, wait a minute, you're going to the beach, you can't use this drop-off zone. That would not be permitted.
But isn't it fair to say that but for the hotel, there would not be that drop-off zone? But for the hotel, the city would retain however many parking places are involved, each one of which produces revenue throughout the course of, 4 months, 6 months, whatever the city decides is the parking season. And is your client planning to compensate the city for that lost revenue from those parking meters?
I think those are conversations that we have to have with the city commissioners once we get site plan approval.
Because that is not uncommon for that kind of compensation.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not agreeing with you either. I'm just saying,
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's something you have to decide. And last, but at least from my point of view, we're going to obviously have a public hearing on this project with June or whenever. I would like, and I think we would all benefit from a conversation at the public hearing, representation from the city. I don't know whether it's the Department of Public Works, the Police Department, Fire and Safety, with respect to this loading dock issue. I don't want to continue to beat what you call the dead horse. But I know that the Rossi report that the city commissioners have been discussing at their work sessions recently flags freight deliveries as a problem in terms of traffic and parking. Obviously the neighbors are concerned, or at least one neighbor is. And I think it would be useful. And the Planning Commission has to consider the factors that I laid out in terms of viewing the site plan. I think it would be very useful if whether our Wallace Montgomery, somebody from City Hall, Building and Licensing, somebody came and explained to us either why or why not that what you think is theoretical, if not nonsensical, and concerns that it's neither, that we should be concerned about it and how it fits into the factors we have to consider in approving or conditioning an approval of the site plan with respect to the issue of the loading dock.
Obviously, I have no objection to that. I mean, I'm happy to have, I see you've got some officials here, but I don't know that they're prepared to
No, I'm not
address
talking
this topic.
today.
Yeah. No, so I don't think that's an unreasonable request at all. And, I'm sure that Matt and the planning department can have the right person or persons available at what I hope is the public hearing that we have next month. So I'm going to continue down my list. One of the suggestions that Commissioner Strange, who couldn't be here today, made, and I thought it was a good one, was coming out of the parking garage, visibility to the right might be impaired. Could we open up that wall so there could be visibility to the right? Yes. And I think we said yes last month, but we're saying yes again. And Mr. Chairman, that'll be part of the little tweaks that we make to the plan that we resubmit very promptly so that you'll have the site plan in front of you. We didn't make it and submit a plan today because I thought it would be really confusing to keep having to submit more and more plans. I wanted to get through this meeting, have a list of all the changes that we'd make to the plan so that there's a final version to give you for the public hearing.
Yes, sir. Please get that list in as soon as you can.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
One of the things that we talked about last month was dewatering and floodgates for the parking garage underneath. And I think that we talked about the fact that, you have these flood barriers that when there's a heavy storm coming, they're in a little hideaway, and then you pull them, you essentially draw them out and block entrance into the parking garage with them. They're stored on site and are available whenever, a major storm event is threatened. I don't know if there's anything more that you needed us to say about those or you had any further questions about that, but I'm happy to either answer them myself or have another member of the team answer them if you do have questions. You had a question about the sidewalk and boardwalk impacts during construction. I have Mr. Jeff Zell here who can talk to you about that and then just generally about the construction process. I know you had questions about that, so I thought maybe now might be the time to do that, Jeff, if you wanted to talk about it.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Zell, JM Zell Partners. It's going to be project management. We're going to follow best practices on this, and this is a major construction project. So safety and overall how we're going to control the site is going to be paramount to the groups of people that we're going to have build this, and they're going to be under a compliance issue from our team to how to manage the sidewalk and the boardwalk area. The boardwalk area will be obviously not only have a barrier, and that barrier can be in many different ways, and that's something I'd like to work with the city with, because we can make it very, how can I say it, almost a marketing situation for the boardwalk itself, so that it is in a way that's done in a stylish manner, so that people look at it and say, wow, this is going to be pretty, whether it's the building or whether it's the future retailers, because we plan on putting back pretty much the same group of people there, so we can redraw to show what's going to be there. So the whole purpose of the visual aspect would be very, very done professionally, and we would take any input that you would give us to make sure that we do it correctly. Now, from a safety perspective, we will make sure that nobody can get around those barriers or in them, and it'll be done in a manner that you won't even know that it's occurring. There'll be scaffolding so that it is kind of hidden behind all the stuff that'll be there. From protective aspect, nobody wants anybody even close to getting any near equipment or holes or any aspects of the construction situation. And we have safety checks in the morning, afternoon, and evening. We make sure everybody's under full compliance and making sure not only the people that are working on the site, but anybody that's nearby the site will be protected and or blockaded from getting there. But we're going to try and make this as, we hope you don't notice, but you will, but we'll make it so that it doesn't affect any of the people that are walking up and down the boardwalk. It should be a pleasant way of going past the building, and we will contain the site. And we're actively managing this on basically an hour-to-hour basis. And there are 3 or 4 people that'll be responsible for the different elements of this every day from our team. So this is, can I say, this is really a full-on, what we would consider, that is not a beach built building. This is a real concrete laid-in building that's going to be substantial here. So we're going to be very careful, but it'll go up actually a lot faster, we think, because of how we are going to phase this thing in. So we hope to make this as quick as possible and up and operational, and it'll be safe.
So can I just ask a point of clarification?
Yeah.
Are you saying there will be no impacts to passersby and users
Yeah,
of the boardwalk?
the only impact, to be honest with you, obviously, is the retail element will be closed. So, but from an area of where you walk, I'm saying there should be hardly any or zero if we do this correctly. But I'm hoping we make this. I mean, I always like marketing and showing what's coming and the quality of what you're providing in Rehoboth. I want Rehoboth to get value out of this. This is kind of a refresher situation. And that doesn't mean changing the retailers. The same retailers will come back. They'll just come back in better facilities, we believe. And hopefully for the next 50 to 100 years, they'll be in a better place to run their business. So that's what we're trying to do, is upgrade the facility. And we'll put in the best retailers we can. And we're not looking to change the flavor of the boardwalk. And so we will make sure that people have a pleasant experience going by.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list, and if I'm going out of order, I'll come back to anything that you all think I may have missed. I do want to touch on, we talked last month about what we called underpinning and the construction techniques related to the parking, the underground parking itself. And I want to observe 2 things, and of course we have our expert here as well, but I want to be clear about a couple things. One of the methods that we described last month was called underpinning, where you take, I'm going to say pins, but I'm a layman, and essentially drive them at an angle, and that angle goes underneath the neighbor's property, and it's a way to help hold, your building in place and foundations and all that sort of stuff. If we did that, because we don't have to, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but if we used that particular technique, we would need an agreement from the neighboring property owners. And I know there was a suggestion, and I think it was just a little bit of confusion. In Washington, D.C., you have the right to do that if your neighbor won't agree. But that's Washington, D.C., right, where they do it all the time because it's important to do it there. This is Rehoboth. I don't even know that anybody has used this technique before in Rehoboth, but it's very standard, as you heard our experts say last month. It's not the only technique that's required or possible, though. If the neighbors don't agree, you can do essentially what I think of as reverse underpinning, where you, instead of driving the pins out, you drive them in and you have more weight to hold the thing in place. So it's not the case that we have to do that or this project can't proceed. You know, I always say this out of earshot of my own cat, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so if we can't do the one technique, we'll do the other technique. This is really all part of the construction building code process. But I know that our one neighbor is here today, and he's got another very long PowerPoint that he wants to show. And at the end of that PowerPoint, he says that you should make it a condition that we use this one technique and get an agreement with him and get an agreement with the neighbor as a condition of, in fact, he suggests, at least as I read what he's filed, even before you grant site plan approval. And the answer, I just want to be clear, we don't have to do that particular technique. It's a good technique, and we'd be happy to do it if we can get an agreement with our neighbors to do it. But, you know, at the same time, we don't need it. And if our neighbors view this as an opportunity to defeat this project or otherwise hold it up, we don't need to do that. And so there are other techniques that we can use that are just as accepted, just as safe, just as effective. They may be a little more costly, but they're workable and they work and they're used. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I know he's going to speak and we'll probably speak after he does, but we don't need that particular technique, but we probably, all things being equal, like to use it if we can reach an agreement with those neighbors.
And just to be clear, would this alternate technique that I'm sure you'll describe, would that require access on the neighboring properties or not?
No, it does not. That's the point. So, you know, the point is, if you can't get the agreement of your neighbors, you can do it yourself. And I can submit drawings to you comparing the two, or showing the difference between the two techniques. As I say, in one, you've got, I'm going to say pins, but they're not really pins that go out. In the other, you've got counterweighted pins that go in that hold the building in place. It's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Either works, either are accepted, either are done, either are permissible under, you know, the applicable building codes. So we're happy to work with our neighbors. We'd like to work with our neighbors. The other thing you heard us talk about last month is, you know, you do kind of video records of what your neighbor's properties look like before you begin your work. And so that at the end of the job, if your neighbor comes to you and says, look at this big crack, this was not there. Okay, let's go to the video. And we look at the video of what was there before the work started. And if now there's a crack and it has to be repaired, then it's going to be on us. But if that crack was already there, well, I mean, we're not responsible for it. So again, we'll do that with our neighbors. We're happy to do that with our neighbors, assuming we can reach an agreement with our neighbors to let us do that. I mean, if they won't let us video anything, then obviously we can't do that.
Do you mind asking your expert to come forward? And there's been a whole lot of discussion about this issue and and concern about the integrity of the neighbors' buildings during the construction process. Do you have someone here today that can describe this alternative that you've talked about?
I do. Sanjay? Oh, Jeff, okay, let me Jeff talk first.
Let me just set up, and then we'll have him up next, just so I can explain how he works with us, okay, so that you understand.
Presumably for a paycheck.
Pardon me?
Presumably for a paycheck.
Yeah, and also to make sure the building works and makes sure that you're happy and I'm happy.
Oh, there's that. Okay.
Because if you're happy, I'm happy. I mean, the bottom line is, I just want to say, we're interviewing 2 construction firms right now. One does about $4 billion a year. The other does about $1.5 billion a year in construction. One of them does a lot of stuff on waterfronts, and that's one of the reasons we're talking to them as well, because I think they understand exactly what you're concerned about. The other one does as well. And did a lot of stuff in Baltimore, Norfolk, and in those areas. These firms carry, first of all, they're required under our contract. We have loans that'll be from banks that'll be in the tens of millions of dollars. And nobody wants to see this occur or create a problem next door or make sure these buildings don't work. We have to deliver an occupiable building, and we get an occupancy permit from your building planning group. And before that, we can't open up the property. So my job and the job of coordination is to bring in the experts, like a consultant for the subterranean issue here, to put in the right infrastructure so that we can build above it and make sure this thing is standing for years to come and you're all happy about what you see. And what we paid for, we get. So we're very difficult in that process to making sure that this is done right. And there's a lot of money going in here. A lot of it has to do with the conditions that we're trying to make sure that this building can survive through, like wind, all the storm. We're not drawing a blind eye to it. This whole thing is being designed to handle all that. Now, we bring in experts to tell us how to do it, and it costs us money to do it, and we can make that happen. When we go to the subterranean stuff, just real quick, and then we'll bring them up, is currently, we're not going that much further below what we currently have in the current basement right now. We're used to going 30 to 50 feet beyond that and excavating out and holding buildings up to the side and coming out of the ground. We're only talking probably 5-6 feet difference than what's already there in the center structure. But we're bringing in all the experts we can. It'll be insured. We will make sure this doesn't happen. We will come up with a solution. I will tell you, we came up with a third way of doing this just in my discussion earlier today with our expert that I think is what we'll ultimately get to. And it has to meet current building codes, both from your regulatory basis, the state of Delaware, and from all codes, building codes done, and it has to meet the requirement, number one. And number two, we're subject to inspections and making sure that we're doing it right and we're not encroaching on properties. This happens in an orderly basis. If we do something wrong, we should be held accountable for it. We're 100% behind that. And we have a lot of money that's gonna be there to compensate if it happens. It very rarely, if ever, happens, just so you know, because nobody wants to get involved with all that. So I will bring up somebody from Tadrick Cohen's office that is actually evaluating this as an expert. And we're more than happy, by the way. I am volunteering this. I know you have somebody that you brought on to look at this. We would like to interface with another expert if you want from your side that can actually hash through this versus just coming up with these ideas of what could happen when in fact there are professionals that actually address this on a basis. I'd like to have a meaningful discussion and not just, hey, this could happen here, or we could do. We're going to do it right, and we would love for you to bring somebody in to review what we have, because that's what we do, and we're proud of what we'll do.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sanjay Khanna with Tadrick Nettleson, principal. I'm a licensed professional engineer in 11 states, including Delaware. I was here last time, a month back, and I had discussed giving you some idea about underpinning. And since the subject has come up about what I would describe as an earth retention system. So we're retaining earth, whether there is an existing building next to us or not. And earth can be retained essentially with many different techniques. Now, one of the more common and less costly technique is where we call pit underpinning or bracket piles, where we actually go underneath the existing. And I've actually got some drawings here that I don't know if I can project them up on the screen. I can show you. That'll be very helpful. Is that possible?
I'm sorry.
Can I project that?
I handed you all copies.
Okay, they have copies?
We have copies, but you can put them on there.
Right here?
Zoom in, yeah.
Oh, okay, good. The other way around.
Yes, please take your time and detail this for the public as well.
Sure, absolutely. So this is a technique. It's called direct underpinning. And what I'm showing over here is the adjacent building being supported on pit underpinning. So what we do is we essentially will dig, and again, the design of this is done by professionals that specialize in this. They're called sheeting and shoring contractors. we as the engineer's record would show this diagram on the drawing, and the actual design will be done by a professional engineer retained by a sheeting and shoring company. So you dig pits maybe 3 or 4 foot wide, and you dig it underneath the adjacent footing. The footing itself will actually span across that 3 foot width. You will you would actually pour the concrete, leave 2 inches of dry pack, and once the dry pack sets in, the load gets transferred, and it's done alternately. I think Peter is showing where the dry pack is, where the underpinning pit is. Now, obviously, this will need permission from the neighbor, and we have, what you have when you excavate down is a tieback. You see that, that thing going at an angle? That goes into the ground, and what it does is it prevents the underpinning, pit underpinning from buckling out. So when you excavate down, it prevents the soil from behind to push against it. I mean, to prevent it, so it goes into tension. And that design is a very, very commonly used. I would say probably 50% of the buildings we underpin, and typically, I would say in a year, we're one of the largest structural lending firms in the DC area. I'd say we probably have at least 30 or 40 buildings every year that we're underpinning in a similar system to this. Because many of the buildings we do in DC and around in urban areas have existing buildings next to them which need to be underpinned. So this is one technique, and this is what I would call direct underpinning. I also want to show you the other technique, which I am going to call indirect underpinning. So this is the second option, where we don't get permission from the adjacent neighbor, and we're going to do it without going on their property. So this technique is a system called a tangent pile. And a tangent pile is augured. It's usually, depending on the depth of excavation, here we're only talking about 15 feet. And that tangent pile is drilled, and it is grouted with, and it's got a cage or rebar cage in it. And as you can see over there, typically that distance, so that we don't go into the neighbor's property, is approximately 6 inches away from the wall. And we poured the concrete caisson or pile, whatever you want to call it, with rebar in it. And they're done like 8 feet apart, and they come back and do the inside. So you're really creating a wall. If you go on Google, you can actually see what a tangent pile looks like. You know, you can Google it and you'll see it. But again, this is used very commonly. And as you excavate down, we put in what we call a raker. You see on the right-hand side, it's called a raker. And there's a veiler that runs horizontally. And the veiler is kept about 12 inches away because there'll be a basement wall coming later. So we excavate down. It's designed very stiff, again, by the sheeting and shoring contractor who has a professional engineer sealing it. And the raker and the heel block on the right-hand side. Peter, can you show the heel block? So that heel block is put in first from the top down, and these rakers can be approximately 20 to 30 feet apart. So you go in, you put in your tangent piles, you put in the raker, and you put in the veiler when you excavate down, because they'll cantilever over from, let's say you're excavating down about 4 feet, that tangent pile wall will cantilever off, and it's designed very stiff. Once the veiler comes in, it's holding it up, and it cantilevers off that top 4 feet or 5 feet, whatever that distance is. And then you excavate down, and the tangent pile will go approximately 10 to 15 feet below the bottom of the mat. And I'm also showing you the system we're proposing to design here, which is a mat foundation, because since we're going to be designing a dry basement, we're going to probably have a mat foundation with tie downs to resist the flood elevation, which is what we spoke about last time. Again, this is something we do very often. In fact, I've also spoken to Burkle Foundation, is one of the largest contractors in this area. I spoke today with Jim Bedro, who does this kind of work, and he told me that he could do it with 12 inches tangent piles. I explained the situation to him. In fact, he told me he's doing a similar one in Bethesda, Maryland, where they're cutting down 40 feet on an existing building adjacent to it, 40 feet of excavation. The tangent piles on that project are 18 inches round. He said with a 15-foot cut, 12 inches would work. But again, those are technicalities, but this is done all the time.
I'm struggling with option 1 and option 2, and forgive me, it's probably my lack of background in this area, but when I look at option one, I see a thicker wall. I see there are tiebacks into the adjoining property. But when I go to option two, I'm trying to understand the difference that you make to provide the same level of structural support. Could you just, as simply as possible?
All right, I don't want to get too technical
Explain
for
that
you,
to
but
me.
if you look at option one, Peter, could you put option one again? So at option one, we're essentially doing a non-reinforced pit underpinning. It's just a concrete, solid concrete going underneath, directly underneath. That's when the adjacent neighbor gives us permission to underpin their building. And the tieback, again, you're going on their property. It's a temporary tieback. The tieback is not permanent. It's only needed till our basement wall and the slab gets poured. Once a mat foundation, the basement wall and the slab gets poured, the tieback can be removed. And it's only temporary. The raker is, again, as an alternate and the veiler.
Peter Follett, let me explain just something real quick. Sure. So this option, basically, you're taking the neighbor's foundations and you're extending them below our foundation. Okay, so this piece right here, that's their foundation, right?
Right.
So we are basically extending this bearing point, this load, all the way so that it bears down here, right? In this system here, because the way this works is you are actually building a new wall that's sort of not on their land and not a part of their structure and not a part of our new structure, but it's really just a retaining wall, and it comes all the way down. This goes in first, right? Before any of this is excavated, this all goes in, right? And then you dig the hole. So that means that when we build this new foundation, see, the thing about it is the new structural foundation, if it doesn't have, if it has a zone of impact, so this foundation has to be lowered so that this foundation doesn't affect that building, right? And so what happens here is we build this wall so that this foundation, now this wall now does exactly what the other scheme did, but it does it on our side of the property, that's all.
How wide is that wall?
This new wall, is 12 inches.
It's not a wall. It's actually, they're round,
Okay.
they're tangent piles. So it's a round, 12-inch round, call it a caisson. You auger it, and then you pour concrete, and it's got a cage, rebar cage in it that you fill in. So
It's permanently there.
that is permanent. Yes, you're right. That is permanent. But let me kind of back up here. Once our basement wall is built, all it's doing at that point, it's just transferring lateral load from the dirt because there's dirt pressing against it. That lateral load's transferred. Our basement wall is permanent. But that tangent wall is also permanent because it's concrete. It's only going to be acting like dirt at that point. But in the beginning, when the excavation is done, it's taking tension also because there is no basement wall at that point.
But it is added and it is on your side of the property.
Yes, absolutely.
Would that not affect the dimensions of the parking in that area?
It would affect the dimension of the parking, but the parking, we can accommodate that. The parking will be designed to adjust for that.
I think we might need to see a drawing. If that's going to be an option that's figured after the fact, then I think we need to have both drawings submitted so that we know that the parking meets the code of 9 by 18 feet, whatever it is, for each parking space.
So, I mean, with all due respect, no. You're asking for too much at this point. We do not know what technique we're going to use because we're not to that point yet. When we're ready to start doing construction drawings and construction detail, we have to go back to the city.
I'm not asking for the construction, I'm just asking for the plan for the parking level under each of those options. And the reason is, if you end up doing option 2 and you don't have enough parking, I don't know what you do after that.
Reduce the number of hotel rooms.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer. I mean,
That's
so.
the answer.
I
So
mean,
when we submit for building permit, right, the building will essentially stay the same. If for some reason we lose 1 or 2 spaces, we'll basically take 2 of the rooms and we'll make them into a suite. We will try to avoid that at all costs.
Right, okay,
But that is
we'll
an
have to put
option.
that
The
into
rest of the building will stay exactly the same.
Put that in as a
Yeah,
stipulation.
exactly.
Okay.
Peter.
That's the way it
Okay.
works.
Peter, you,
Can I just say one more quick thing?
Just curious.
I'm sorry?
Mike had raised this before. That's why.
We don't need another.
Well, just one more quick thing. So to answer your question, there are things structurally we do all the time. We can do transfers. We can reduce the number of columns down below. We can make columns skinny and long. I do it all the time to fit in more parking spots. There are many techniques available. We reduce column, so there are ways possible. I think that'll come a little bit further down.
Okay.
But we understand your concern.
Yeah.
Peter, I assume,
Thank you, by the way, for clarifying
Yeah, that's
that.
good.
Peter, just a quick question for you. I assume that you've already planned on a certain thickness for the walls down in the parking area.
That's correct.
Can you tell us what that is? We don't have the drawings here.
12 inches.
Okay, so,
Actually, it could even be 8.
We're getting like, we will engineer it so that it works. We're obviously going to try not to lose any parking spaces. There may be also a technique where we change the angle slightly. That's going to be part of the construction documents.
Now, is there any benefit to the adjacent landowners from either one of these techniques? I'm just trying to see if there's some way that the adjacent landowners can understand that this is helpful to them.
It's pretty much neutral in terms of it's going to be 100% bulletproof either way. That's just the way it is. Now, one thing I was asking was what happens when they build their building? So what happens when they build their building? Our building is structurally sound. It's to that level. So if they come back and they build a new building that is deeper than ours, then they'll have to underpin our structure. But all that underpinning that we put in there, they would take that out when they build their new building. It doesn't prohibit them from going right up to this property line. So it's a very standard process. And the one thing about the tangent piles is you have to realize that we're starting with them 8 feet apart. Then we're basically building another one right next to it, So it's like it's like a series of connected tubes. So it's really time-consuming and expensive, right? But it's possible.
And one last thing. So just to, because I do this a lot, many buildings, as I said, have underpinning. If I had to give you just a number, I'd say about 90 to 95% of the buildings have some kind of direct underpinning. Indirect underpinning is pretty uncommon, and most neighbors do allow, as Peter mentioned in DC, it's actually, they force the neighbor to do it. Again, that's not the rules here, but some jurisdictions do require, I think even Montgomery County requires that. So anyway, and one more last thing. When I did talk to Dave Vedra from Berkeley today, who most likely might be the one doing this, and they do a lot of work in Delaware too, along the beaches. He mentioned there is a particular rig that they can use, and actually they can get even closer. They can come face on line, so that 12-inch would probably be, they might try a 10-inch, but they could probably use a 12-inch, tangent pile. It could be, with a small rig, they could actually almost touch it, so you don't lose those 6 inches. And the basement wall can definitely go down to 8 inches with highest end concrete. We could use 8 or 10 KSI concrete. It's only one lift, so it can be engineered with heavier rebar, with a thinner wall.
Thank you.
And getting back to Commissioner Gay's point, which makes sense, and I understand why you asked it. I mean, we have to have one parking spot for every hotel room. And so, not surprisingly, we're going to do everything we can to lose any parking spaces. I don't think we will. I think there's just enough give anyway. But you've heard, yeah, it's tight. But at the end of the day, if we come in and there's one less parking space, we'll get one less room. I mean, and we acknowledge that, we know that. You're given the site you're given.
I take it under option 2, and I don't know who this question is for, but this raker, I take that's just temporary, right? That doesn't stay there permanently, is that? Yeah. And then at the risk of making this longer, you mentioned a third option. Does it make any sense to outline the third option or not?
It's a technique using a different system for the tangent piles. It's an interlocking system, but we don't need to get it. It's the same principle as the
Okay.
Let's take a 5-minute recess. I don't want anyone to fall asleep while they're watching this.
really exciting.
Well, I understand. Let's take a 5-minute recess.
You do have a couple more issues than.
Yes, we do, yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Okay, we'll take
Yeah, we ought to, she's back.
Okay, let's reconvene, please. I'd like to reconvene this special meeting of the Planning Commission, which was scheduled to hear this matter only.
Okay, see, I guess he's gonna.
For the moment, it is.
Mr. Forston, you are still on duty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
It's just a couple of items that we still need to cover, and one clarification. I was able to have a sidebar with our architect about the antenna that is supposed to be stealthed. And I had not realized, and shame on me, but I do need new glasses. I had always assumed that it was covered with, clapboard or siding or something to make it look, to my poor eyes, it actually looks like a solid wall that goes up. But when I actually stood and looked closely, I do see that the whole thing is more of an antenna. So our plan will be, and we will show this on the drawing that we submit, that we will have it covered with, appropriate architectural siding or whatever. So it will look more like a church steeple and it will not appear to be an antenna. So I just want to make that point clear. And that actually evokes more of what the original Belhaven looked like anyway. So.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Ellison.
Mr. Forson, as long as you're there, you didn't mention anything about the cupola, which also exceeds the 42 feet. What are you assuming about that?
The cupola is not inhabitable space. It's not floor area at all. I mean, it's just decorative, just like the what I'll now refer to as steeple instead of antenna. So, again, unless I'm missing a specific provision of the code, but my understanding is because it's not intended as floor space at all, and it's really just an architectural element or detail, that it's not subject to that restriction, just as what we'll now call steeple is not subject to that restriction. Peter? What did I say wrong, Peter?
The cupola is an architectural feature. It's allowed to be, the maximum height of that is allowed to be 50 feet, and it has to be less than 15%, I think, or 25. I don't know the number now. It's getting me a little bit fuzzy, either 15 or 25% of the site area. And that was a question. We were like, we were slightly over that about 3 or 4 hearings ago. We made it smaller so that it complies with the right size.
If you, for one reason or another, cannot do the antenna, would you still do the cupola?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. There were a couple of, I think, just a few more questions to follow up on. One of them was the fire marshal. I do have the letter from the fire marshal where he approved our plan. I'm happy to provide you copies of that. There haven't been any changes to the site plan, since this letter was issued. At one point, we were going to add a second level of underground parking. Then we did away with that. His letter goes back to, was from when there was no second level of underground parking. So, he reviewed what's there, and there hasn't been any change. So I know there was that kind of intermediate step where we looked at a second level of underground parking, then we withdrew it. So having withdrawn that, this letter, I'll just give you copies of it so you have it, is for you.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, yeah. Those loose ends. Thank you.
And you'll submit copies to city planning as well?
I believe they already have it,
Okay.
but if not, I will. And, as we discussed before, this is just for the site plan itself. Obviously, when we have the construction drawings, there's a whole other level of fire marshal review that comes into play, and that still needs to occur, and it will occur.
Yes, sir.
Then the last item I have on my list, well, 2 items. Lot consolidation, obviously we'll get that done. I don't know if the code has actually formally been amended yet or
Yes.
not.
It is.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
April
So if we can include that in the same public hearing for the site plan, that'd be great. If we have to come back for a second public hearing on the lot consolidation, whatever works from a scheduling point of view, but I don't,
We have the option, right? Yeah.
yeah.
There is an option. It can be concurrent or not, right? Yeah.
Right, so I'll, you know, I just assume, I mean, look, I like coming to Rehoboth every month.
Did the code change eliminate the requirement that the lots to be consolidated be in common ownership?
No, that's in there.
Okay, well,
So,
I
and so
would-
that's going to happen. They're going to be put in common ownership?
Yes.
Okay.
before we have the public hearing.
And, yeah, I think it has to be put in common ownership even before the public hearing is noticed, I believe. Right, Ann? Yes, before the public hearing is noticed. It
All
has
right,
to be in
well,
common
I'll review the timing issues with Alex and Luke and make sure that we've got that squared away.
Sure.
How are we putting it in common ownership? If you guys don't
Yeah,
accept.
Hal, you gotta need to talk to a microphone.
Please go over to the a microphone.
I gotta come over here.
Anyway.
You have the same owner for all 3 lots.
How can we go ahead and put it in common ownership without your approval?
They don't have to be done at the same time.
We don't have to approve the common ownership. It just has to be a prerequisite that it is in common ownership.
Correct. And when I originally made the application here, and I think that Mr. Janis has that application for the consolidation, so I guess what we need to do, the way I read this, is you'll notice it for the June hearing when we have our hearing, public hearing for the site plan, and that will be appropriate in accordance with the new code, or the new statute. Is that correct?
That will work. We can also proceed, you could also elect to have it proceed on the site plan itself through its ultimate decision, and then schedule a lot consolidation immediately after that.
We've had enough hearings. We're trying to keep the hearings short. I know you guys.
Oh, no, sir, I have to reject that objection. We can't have enough hearings.
Well, the point I'm making is, I didn't know whether it's like chicken and the egg thing. So we'll go ahead and I'll meet with Mr. Janis and we'll make it right. But
Okay, thank you,
I
sir.
would like it to be as part of the advertisement for the public hearing for June, please.
Well, that's-
Thank you.
That's the paperwork between you and planning.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The last item I had on my list was the parking space size and column issue. And after our meeting in April, I gave Peter and his team a little homework assignment. I said, I want you to go for every spot on the plan, tell me how much square footage is in that spot, subtracting out whatever the little bit of square footage is associated with the column in some of those spots. So this is the result of his homework assignment. I've got a copy for each of you, of course, with the exact square footage. And you'll see they're not all the same.
Yeah.
And that's because some of them, there's a column that intrudes a little bit. But they all exceed the minimum amount.
Okay.
And the angle of the spacing is correct as well? Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Should we get this to Mike Strange? I'm gonna have to scan them.
Please be sure to share that with Mr. Strange.
Yes, I was just saying that. I'm gonna
Hurry.
scan them and send them to Mike Strange.
Please do. Wouldn't want to miss it.
So I know the question had been raised or asked, you know, do all the spots have the minimum square footage? And the answer is yes. And so with that, covered everything on my list, but I mean, Luke, if I missed something from our conversation or anybody has any other
I got a couple
questions.
You mentioned trash room, but then you didn't spend any time talking about it. And so I'm thinking that the hotel management, since you had introduced him and talked about all the other properties you have, he might be a good one to weigh
No, I
in on
apologize.
that.
I was supposed to ask him that question when he was up
Yeah.
here and I forgot.
Because it looks small, but my other question, I guess, is it going to be available for all of the retail spaces as well as the hotel, the trash room?
The plan is not to make it available for the retail tenants. They're responsible for their trash now. They'll be
Okay.
responsible for their trash going forward.
Okay, that, yeah.
So just based on the business needs of the hotel would determine the amount of pickups.
Yeah.
So it would probably be 3 times a week, if I were to guess, in a hotel this size and how busy it's going to be, which it's pretty easily accessible. So we're talking a few minutes there as far as them coming in and out and dumping and going on their way.
So it won't be available to the retail stores?
And what are your plans for the retail tenants with respect to the trash?
They will have their own trash.
Within the
I'm-
store?
I'm sure they will have their own trash. My question is, how will they dispose of it?
Yeah, right now, I mean, they'll dispose of it the way they're disposing of it right now. I mean, it's their issue. They're a store. They got to make arrangements for their
If this is
trash.
going to be a brand-new space, differently configured, do they just put big black trash bags out the front door on Rehoboth Avenue?
Well, we're not going to let them do that under their
Well,
lease. They're
but
not allowed to do
there's-
that.
What's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is they have to dispose of their trash. I mean, they dispose of it now. I don't know how Grotto's gets rid of their trash or
I'm not
Candy
sure I know
Kitchen
what the
does.
code is regarding the, like, retail space trash areas. If they have to be screened, if they can be internal to the store, I don't know.
That's a great question. That's only if we have dumpsters located outside. So if there's actual outdoor containing units, those have to be screened.
Right. But they are allowed to have it inside their
Sure.
store? Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
But who picks it up? How is it disposed of? How does it get from inside their space to a landfill or wherever? I mean, I'm thinking of it's more trucks, it's more activity, it's more complicated, and there's no facility for them to store their trash, for example, until the truck that they've arranged for can come and pick it up.
Well, as we know, they will have access to the loading dock itself. We've said that. That's always been the plan. So if, on Thursday, Candy Kitchen is when they have their trash guy come to pick their trash, then on Thursday, they'll have a standing, 8 o'clock, 8:30, 7:30, whatever the time is. They'll wheel their trash out. That truck will be there. They'll put it in. Or, maybe they'll take care of it themselves directly. I'm not familiar enough with the operation, the way our tenants operate their businesses now. Some of these spaces, if they're not heavy trash generators, I don't know that it's much of an issue for them anyway.
But I think, if I understand it, the bottom line is that the retail shops and stores will to dispose of their trash, and for their trucks to come and pick up the trash, they will be using the hotel's loading dock.
Presumably, I mean, if I've got a 2,000 square foot space and I've got a trash bag, I may just take it home and put it in my own garbage, at the end of the night.
Some of them may do that, yeah.
Right, and so, the most frequent answer that I give clients as a lawyer, and Luke, you're probably the same way, and Alex, you're probably the same way, when I'm asked a question, my first response is always, it depends. It just depends on the situation, it depends on a lot of factors that go into that. And some may do it this way, and some may do it that way. The loading dock will be an option, but it's up to them.
I only have one other thing, and it wasn't on this list because it just actually came up recently with another case, and it's just something really for the record. It's not a question so much as a statement. Many months ago, Mr. Falat had confirmed that this is one building, it's one building permit, it's one building, right? And I'm sure you're aware then that where restaurants are concerned, there are restrictions, so that restaurants that serve alcohol There can only be 3,700 square feet of those in the entire building. So the restaurant within the hotel is about 3,300 square feet. So essentially, none of the retail areas can be a restaurant serving alcohol unless you get a variance. But I assume you know that. I was just putting it there for the record.
I understand, and yes, I agree. I mean, whatever the zoning code is, we have to comply with it absent a variance.
All right.
Okay, well, at this point, Mr. Chairman, I would be remiss, and Alex and his father would be beating me up walking back out of here if I didn't say, can we please have our public hearing in June?
Well, let's hear from the public.
Okay. But I
We'll
said,
circle back.
I
We'll
had to
circle back.
ask.
Yes, sir. Anyone from the public here, please, wish to speak? Now, this is a preliminary site plan review, Dr. Trejos, and so present, please, what you have with the thought
intent, with
that
the intent.
we have a public hearing coming down the road.
Right, but with the intent of what we're doing here with the site plan, that's
Yes, sir.
correct. Let's see, that's not going to work. Again, my name is Dr. Michael Trejos. I'm the co-owner of the properties located at 1 Wilmington Avenue and at 7 through 15 South Boardwalk. Before I begin, Mr. Chairman, I would like to request that the applicant has presented new information with regard to underpinning, and those I would request be part of the permanent record. They have not submitted those to Ann, and so option 1 and option 2 should be submitted for the public record and displayed, please.
And I believe you were given copies, is that correct?
No, she was not.
I'll get them to you. I'm going to scan them and get them to you.
Okay,
That was an oversight on my part, Mr. Chairman. I have copies for her. I'll give them to him when the meeting's concluded.
please do.
Very good, thank you.
And all the other information, please, the parking and all of that.
I did give her that.
The applicant has clearly, as a result of this presentation having been posted earlier this week, has quickly now decided to provide an additional option other than option 1, which is option 2. However, even during the debate right now, the applicant is still desiring to do option 1. This presentation was geared to option 1, but option 2 is still open, as we will discuss further on. So let me begin by stating what is pit underpinning. And as you can see here, this is more of a simplistic graphic of how it works. I'm not necessarily going to read every single word here, but basically concrete is poured into it. Then as was stated, a certain amount at the very top is left open, then mortar is placed in, and then everything is allowed to harden. But there's another item here called subsidence risk. So what is subsidence risk with pit underpinning occurs when the structure being underpinned does not lie on one continuous concrete slab on grade. When underpinning is done only to the perimeter of an adjacent structure that lies on non-contiguous, unattached concrete slabs on grade, rubble foundation, or no foundation whatsoever, such a perimeter pit underpinning and the construction vibration puts the adjacent structure at significant subsidence risk. For years, I've been discussing what is liquefaction risk. Again, what liquefaction risk with pit underpinning occurs when there is failure to adequately take into consideration the current depth and future rise of the subterranean water table, and the incorrect design of the underpinning pit depths, resulting in the eventual liquefaction of the sandy soils beneath the pits and the sinking collapse of the underpinned structure. Normally, any sort of this type of situation in a area such as we are here in Rehoboth Beach in FEMA flood zones should have a hydrologist evaluation done by an industry certified, the American Institute of Hydrology specialist to come in and actually do an appropriate evaluation to determine what are the true subterranean hydrostatic and hydrodynamic issues that are going on for the city and the effects on the city too. Now, in order to understand this, I'm just going to quickly show you the maps that go back through the history through the Library of Congress. These are the suborn maps from 1910, 1920. This is, again, the main area that we've been talking about. They're historical maps. This is the historical 1 Wilmington Avenue property as in 1922. The property basically was unchanged from the time it was constructed prior to 1910, with the exception of the front porch being enclosed in 1947. But the property essentially was unchanged at the time we purchased it, and it continued to be, as you see here, in 1957. And now you see it the same in 1958. But now you see the actual great storm of '62 that actually damaged the entire boardwalk area. All the stores were destroyed. But of interest, you'll notice that the Belhaven Hotel is upstanding perfectly fine, even though the ground underneath has been undermined. Clearly, that structure, the Belhaven Hotel, was supported by some sort of a pylon or under support, either wooden pilings or bricks or whatever it was. But going to the 1 Wilmington Avenue property, you can see here, these are now other views post-storm. And we focus here now, I'd like you to focus on the 1 Wilmington Avenue property in question here. And if I zoom in here, you'll notice that there is a significant crawl space all through in here. There is this structure was never built on a concrete slab on grade. Here is another view of the back part where you can see there's again a crawl space, no concrete slab on grade. Here again is the summer of '62 after all the debris was cleared out before the reconstruction occurred. Again, this is a somewhat of a more photograph, but you can see again that there is no concrete slab on grade, and this is all elevated structure. Again, we purchased the property in early 1978. Then in August of '78, improvements were being proposed. We created the original stores that you now see, which is now Zog's Rum Shack, but it was originally 2 stores. But it was built just simply remodeling the existing property, but with no change to the foundation. Again, then in 1981, the property was further improved with a wooden deck and extension of that wooden deck to the area that you can see here. So the wooden deck went from the entrance from south to north, and then also west in this area. The entire wooden deck exists 1 feet off the ground, but with no concrete slab on grade. Then in 1986, we had additional permits being constructed in order to enclose the area pretty much to the north side. Here you can see what the area was here, and also a proposed addition to the kitchen. This was a separate concrete slab on grade, and so was this here. And then this ultimately was done prior to that, and again, a separate concrete slab on grade. This is what it was then in 1992. This is how it looked at that time. In 1994, structural inspections were performed of the property. 2 of them were. One was performed by William Bader of Bader Engineering, and his evaluation showed that the foundation of the building was, quote, full-cut dense pine members with floor joists spanning the east to west direction, the structural beam supports in the north to south direction. Again, no concrete slab on grade was reported to exist. Again, second inspection done by Ray Brotherton Engineering, Inc., a structural foundation investigation revealed that the floor beams were laying on the ground. Further visualization examination, quote, no permanent concrete supports were there for the beams. This is the plot and placement for 1995, included for everybody's record. Then what transpired occurred in 1998, and I need to explain to you what also in part happened here. Between 1997 and 98, during the wintertime, we had a pipe underneath the structure burst, we had 40,000 gallons of water pour underneath the structure. 40,000 gallons, which caused a degree of liquefaction damage to the underside, and the building was actually sinking as a result of that liquefaction. So we have experience with liquefaction at that property site. Additionally, what happened was the area that was previously shown where the west wall was, again, the beams were basically on the ground and the wall was coming up from that. Well, they realized that that wall was no longer able to support because the beams the support beams on the bottom had basically rotted out, and there apparently, I understand, was some termite damage. And so they had to build new concrete walls. Please note that these are the engineering diagrams that showed what transpired. And as you can basically see, what they did is they put in concrete footers and then spanned the concrete footers with the appropriate headers in order to then build the wall that went straight up. So the walls on the west side, let me go back here, the walls on both the west side and the north side do not lay on the concrete slab on grade. They are independent on footers with support headers underneath and going straight up. So this is now the current floor plan for Zogs as we see it today. So what I would like to note here, and again, this photograph is courtesy of the Cape Gazette, that when we're looking at this structure, it's unique in that the pit underpinning of the southeast adjacent property poses a unique challenge in that these properties are located, again, east and south of the proposed construction and are therefore subject to greater oceanic hydrostatic forces than if they were located west of the construction site. Note that this is a L-shaped structure. The engineer of record has stated that he has done significant underpinnings and has done that quite a bit. But I'm curious as to whether or not he has and would be able to show where he has done underpinning on structures that are located first in the FEMA zone AE, 2 adjacent to a FEMA zone VE, 3 are actually parallel to the beach, or shall we say perpendicular to the natural flow of the subterranean water table in this situation here. Normally, underpinning is done on structures that are either going to be, shall we say, parallel, so that they're going to be doing underpinning across here. I don't know how many opportunities, and maybe he can show us, and he can give us examples of where he has actually underpinned situations where we're looking at right here along this our west side wall, their east side structure here. And so as a result, we're going to potentially increase the hydrostatic back pressure. At the April 12, 2019 Planning Commission meeting regarding the Belhaven Hotel project sketch plan review, our then legal counsel made it understood that the adjacent property owners located at 1 Wilmington Avenue and 7 through 15 South Boardwalk were desiring to work with the applicant to make this concept come to fruition and address their issues, our issues concerning the, as stated in the letter from our legal counsel at that time. That legal counsel letter has been included in your packets and they're part of the permanent record. But what I did want to make sure and wanted to address was one item in that legal counsel letter in which we had stated that, and has been already stated, that one day in the future, we may want to redevelop our own properties. Of course, with the Board of Adjustment now approving FARs of 3.0, 2.76, and potentially in the future, the mayor and commissioners are going to probably establish the norm of one day being 3.0, if not more. It is very conceivable that we could build a structure on our site that could easily go up 42 feet and meet that new FAR requirement. In so doing, we are concerned and want to make sure that the applicant at that situation would not be opposed to us building such a structure and coming to the Planning Commission arguing to deny our ability to build to whatever the new FAR code requirements would be, based on economic or aesthetic harm to their property, because in turn it would block their oceanfront view windows. But more importantly, I just want to continue here. At the June 12, 2019 Planning Commission meeting, which was a couple months later, regarding the Belhaven Hotel project sketch plan review, the applicant was asked by then Chairman Mellon whether the applicant had reached out to this adjacent property owner to work together on this project. The applicant responded by stating, quote, "We are not considering that." That is, the applicant essentially made the decision not to cooperatively work together for the betterment of the Belhaven Hotel project and the adjacent property owners. I take exception to Mr. Forston's statement that he is looking for the adjacent property owners to work with the applicant at this time. Please understand that we have been trying to work with the applicant for 5 years. For 5 years. And yet the applicant has been unwilling, in terms of their engineering firms, to be open about their project plans and share their technical schematic drawings with the adjacent property owners prior to the Planning Commission meetings. We've been more than willing to work. We've been more than willing to try and figure this out. But no, it was their choice not to do that. Since June 14th, 2019, I have made multiple presentations addressing the concern for the hydrostatic liquefaction damage collapse of the adjacent properties located at 1 Wilmington Avenue and 7 through 15 South Boardwalk, which are located east and south of the proposed Belhaven Hotel. At the Planning Commission meeting just last month of April 12, 2024, the applicant acknowledged for the first time that without proper underpinning, there is a significant risk for collapse of the adjacent properties. Notification of this significant collapse should have been acknowledged and disclosed to this Planning Commission and the adjacent property owners years ago, not just 1 month ago. No geotechnical report which evaluates the subterranean hydrostatic and hydrodynamic water table and groundwater conditions, types, and physical characteristics of the sandy soils on the site and the surrounding adjacent sites, measuring of the thermal resistivity and the subsurface shifting and changing of the sandy soils to properly protect the foundations and structures of the adjacent properties in the municipality, sidewalks and roadways, and the engineering problems and challenges that would be uncovered as a result of performing these evaluations has yet to be submitted to this Planning Commission and to the adjacent property owners. No design documents showing the general scheme for the proposed pit underpinning of the adjacent structures prepared by the engineer of record and or the specialty underpinning engineer showing the locations, width, and depths of the pits, particularly in reference to the depth of the subterranean water table, the reinforcement, the details of the load transfer, and if needed, the design of tiebacks to stabilize the underpinning piers, and the installation of vibration sensors mounted on the adjacent structures to monitor the ground vibration peak particle velocity generated by the construction activities have yet to be submitted to this Planning Commission and the adjacent property owners. No foundation analysis of the adjacent property foundations performed by the structural engineer has been done in light of the fact that it has now been shown that the original structure that still exists at 1 Wilmington Avenue was constructed prior to 1910, when the laying of foundation concrete slabs on grade was not commonly done in Rehoboth Beach, that rubble foundations and the structures elevated with brick pillars were commonly used, and that the later additions and structural improvements of the original structure at 1 Wilmington Avenue were done at different times, resulting in the laying of variable length, width, and depth concrete footers and separate, unattached, non-continuous concrete slabs on grade with subsidence risk has yet to be submitted to this Planning Commission and this adjacent property owner. This Planning Commission has the fiduciary duty of protecting the public interest and public safety. The applicant has yet to produce the necessary geotechnical, design documents, and foundation analysis reports for this Planning Commission to make the appropriate analysis and decision regarding the impact this project will have on the adjacent property owners and the city municipality sidewalks and roadways to be able to grant any sort of an approval of this proposed Belhaven Hotel site plan. Until such time as all of the above reports have been submitted and adequate time has been provided to review and analyze these reports, the adjacent property owner's underpinning agreements must be a prerequisite, not a conditional, to this Planning Commission's approval of the Belhaven Hotel site plan. Again, I want to just reiterate, it is important to understand that we have always been willing to work with the applicant from day one. But clearly, I take exception when this is not being done, and then we're being potentially accused of delaying the project. We're not delaying the project, and I've always made it very clear from the get-go that we are in support of the redevelopment of this project for a new hotel. Nobody's been questioning that. My interest has been in protecting my adjacent properties that I own, and clearly, there is now a serious consideration of potential problems that can occur. Now, you have heard, we've talked about option one. Option two is something that potentially may need to be taken into consideration as a result of the fact that, again, all the underpinning of our structures using option one would be very difficult, if potentially not impossible to do. But again, I just wanted to raise that situation. And also, I think one other last thing I think we should note here. No subterranean parking garage has ever existed in Rehoboth Beach. As you may remember, this entire, I'm sorry, in terms of the, I should clarify that, I'm in error. No subterranean parking garage has ever been built along the boardwalk in Rehoboth Beach. We have now approved 2 years ago to put an underground parking that will not include as part of the FAR. I totally acknowledge that. But the problem there is that no one has ever done any sort of underpinning, or this was all new to Rehoboth Beach. And again, I am raising serious concerns of the fact that we have too many issues that have to be taken into consideration before a full approval of the Belhaven site plan can be done. If anyone has any questions.
Any members of the commission? Thank you, sir. Mr. Forston. First of all, is there any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, public comment's closed. Now, Mr. Forston, it's my turn to ask questions.
Okay.
And I'll be brief.
Thank you.
We do adjourn at 4:30.
Thank you. Do you want me to say anything in response? I've got.
Thank you very much. Yes, is there not a repartee, not a back and forth, not a debate, but is there some information that can be provided that addresses what Dr. Trejo just stated?
Yes, if Sanjay Khanna can speak.
I didn't want to get very technical earlier, but I had actually seen Dr. Trejo's presentation, and I had come prepared with what he has as a crawl space. And I've made sketches just to show you that it's not going to make any difference. We do building with crawl spaces all the time, and I can show that to you, to show it to Dr. Trejo. I just don't want to, start getting too technical, but I'll show you this. So I did option 1 and 2 earlier. I did option 3 and 4, which will show exactly the same thing with a crawl space. And it came from One Wilmington Center, the drawings he had sent.
Mr. Forston, while he's doing that, when do you think you'll make a decision about option 1, 2, 3, 4 for the underpinning or non-underpinning or whatever?
Well, again, I'm going back to my favorite answer. It depends. I will say in all the time that I have been involved with this project, this is the first time that I have heard Dr. Trejo, who, by the way, is not an engineer, say that he's willing to work with us. In my experience, and I've not been here since 2019, I came in later, all I've seen is a person who comes and complains and criticizes. So I'm encouraged to hear that he's willing to work with us. And if they will do an underpinning agreement with us, that'd be great, and we'd do that. But if they won't, then we'll go with an option that doesn't require that. That will not come in the next month. It won't probably come in the next 2 months. To a certain extent, we got to have a plan approved to figure out what we need to do so that we know what the underpinning, whether there's, how the underpinning agreement is going to work, and there's technical details. There's a lot of construction that goes into that. So it's all a long way of saying that when we get to the building permit construction drawing phase, we'll either have that agreement in place or we won't. And then if we have the agreement in place, we'll use option 1 or some variation of that option 3, I suppose it'll become now. And if we don't have the agreement, then we'll have to go with an option that doesn't involve getting on his property at all, which I think we're allowed to do, right? I'm always allowed to do stuff on my property if I'm not coming on yours. Does that help at all?
It does, in the sense that the construction phase, there may well be opinions sought from others in the trade and the business to basically confirm that what you're telling us is correct. Not sure about that. I'm just saying that that's a potential.
Right. I have every faith in the process here in terms of your all's planning and building department. You've got expert consultants who are also retained by the city from outside the city. And, we're going to have to be submitting drawings and calculations, all sealed by professional engineers who are specialized in these areas. And as Jeff Zell said earlier, there's a lot of money being invested in this project, and the banks don't do that lightly. And so they will be reviewing everything that we want to build as part of the financing. So we all take this very seriously. I hope that has come across these last couple meetings.
I just want to address 2 quick things that Dr. Trejo said. Number one is, and we do a lot of projects like this where when we're submitting drawings for construction, and actually the underpinning is done, drawings are created after the engineering drawings are prepared by us. Although shop drawings will show the whole procedure, typically those are shared with the neighbors. So it's a little early to do that. I've never come to preparing drawings for something that I haven't even designed, but I can show you. For instance, what I'm showing you over here, I just prepared for Dr. Trejo's One Wilmington Center to show that this drawing here has, if you look here, has the same system that he has on his building, which is he's got wood joists, and he's got a crawl space here, and he's got an 8-inch CMU wall, and he's got a 12-inch CMU wall below, and a footing, and he's got a ledger board sitting on it. So the procedure for the pit underpinning will not change if there's a crawl space or if there is no crawl space. It'll be absolutely the same. And to also mention about the hydrologists, we have a reputed geotechnical company that has actually done borings and also has recommendations for the foundation design. So all that, I'm sure, can be provided to him if he wanted, because when we are designing these buildings, we have to make sure that it's safe. We don't design, and by the way, our office does quite a bit of work in the Outer Banks. We've designed hotels right on the water in Nags Head, in Kill Devil Hills, and several other areas in Florida. Also in Tampa, we've done buildings. So all AE zone, we've done projects, even X zone, AE zone, VE zone. So, we have experience in doing this. The water table, by the way, the permanent water table, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is about 14 feet below grade. But we'll be designing it for the flood elevation. So we're designing it really very conservatively for uplift, and that's why we're putting in tie downs.
All right. So from what I heard you say is that you're willing to provide studies and reports to Dr. Trejo that have been done on the property.
Let us review them, but yes, it's all information that eventually will come out because
Yeah, and
we're
it's
gonna
going
have to provide
sure, it'll be subject to FOIA anyway once it's filed.
Well, that, and also, I think to get the permits and approvals, we'll need to supply the relevant studies and things to the town.
Dr. Trejos?
I do just want to make one statement that Mr. Forston just made, that that's the first he's ever heard that we've been willing to discuss. I don't know what communications has been communicated between Mr. Dukes and Mr. Forston. But there is a due diligence that is done in this process where all of these meetings are on YouTube. They began in April of 2019. All of the statements that we have made, all the cooperative statements we have made, are all the public record. If Mr. Forston did not do the due diligence to review it before he made that statement, that's his problem.
All right. Anyone else? What's the pleasure of the commission besides adjournment? Any discussion, any thoughts? Is there a thought about advancing this to a public hearing?
Just as a matter of clarification, I remember this happened with at least one other site plan review, but we're not obligated to do it in one public hearing. I mean, if there are questions that come up in the public hearing, then the
That's
public
correct.
hearing can be continued. Well, I think we've done everything we need to do in preliminary. So, I think we're ready to go to
Is there a
public hearing.
concurrence with that?
I second.
I agree. We need to have a motion.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to move it to public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a third?
And actually, the one logistical thing, we moved the meeting in June to 1 week earlier. It's now June 7th. Does that present any issues with getting the final plans in?
Peter, we can get them in a week, less
No,
than a week.
we had to move it to, because of,
What?
we had some folks who were going to be absent traveling in
Well,
June.
she can notice it. Is that not a problem for you, Ann, right? You can notice it next week?
Yeah, early next week.
Right, so that's, yeah, okay. But I guess we should ask when we would be getting the final plans then. Today's the 9th.
May 9th.
Okay.
Well, does a co-
Yeah, that's right.
Oh,
We-
yeah,
We
right,
have a
yeah,
30-day
right, yeah, no,
rule,
that's fine,
pre-filing requirement.
Right.
And so I think as part of this motion, may entertain an amendment to waive that
that's
if
fine.
the motion is adopted.
Yes, that's fine.
my question is whether or not, along with the notice, we have to be able to attach the plans or some
No,
facsimile of the
not,
plans.
they don't have to be in at the same time as the notice.
Public notice, I can't.
Right.
Okay, but at what,
I can forward them to the planning commission members.
right, I think it would be useful if we knew what the deadline would be for us to get whatever change plans.
Monday.
We just said we'd get them Monday, so we'll have them, so I think we'll clearly have them at least 21 days before
Okay.
the meeting, yeah.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there, is the amendment, do we have you made the motion to amend, is there a second to that?
Second.
All right,
We're going to do roll call vote or just voice vote?
That's fine, you don't need a roll.
yeah.
Okay, voice vote.
All those in favor of moving this to public hearing and waiving the pre-filing requirement of a 30-day pre-filing requirement to Monday, which is May 10th,
No, Monday is May 13th.
13th, sorry. I'm still on daylight saving time. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very
We've
much.
come a long way.
Yeah?
Yes, we have. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So is this meeting adjourned?
It is.
Oh, okay, you didn't say that.
I meant it.
Recording.